Hello, everyone, and welcome into today's Daily Bible reading for Wednesday, October the 26th. Today, we are going to be reading together from Job chapter 21 here in just a moment. But before we get into that, we would be remiss if we didn't mention how much we love and are thinking about Leslie and the Hoover family right now with Billy's passing yesterday. Our hearts go out to them, and we as a church family obviously are hurting as well for his loss, and yet it's a weird moment because we are so sorry for the loss of a relationship and a friendship on this side of eternity, but we rejoice in his faith and the confidence that we have in God's promises to him and to all the faithful. And we are thankful that his body, though it is left here, who Billy is, his soul is with the Lord now, and we're thankful for that. And I do not have any arrangements right now that have been made known to me, but as soon as those are made, I will pass those along ASAP so people can make their plans to be there to support the Hoovers and to show our love for them. With all that said, let's get into our read for today, which is Job chapter 21. Let me get that text up on the screen for us. Job chapter 21. Job is addressing the second speech now that has been made by Zophar, and this is going to be the last speech to conclude the second series or second cycle of speeches within this writing. And Job within this text, within this particular chapter, is going to really just he's going to challenge their perception of reality. He's going to challenge them in how they think that good things always happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. Because that's really the basis of Zophar's last speech is, listen, these bad people do things and all they get is bad in return. That's what happens. And Job here is going to say, no, I don't think that's exactly how things happen. And he's going to draw on his own anecdotal evidence, which I believe is very much accurate to reality. So let's note that as we go through here in Job 21. Job 21, beginning in verse number 1. Job 21 in verse number 1. Then Job answered, pay close attention to my words. Let this be the consolation you offer. Bear with me while I speak. Then after I have spoken, you may continue mocking. As for me, is my complaint against a human being? Then why shouldn't I be patient? Or why should I be impatient? Look at me and shudder. Put your hand over your mouth. When I think about it, I am terrified, and my whole body trembles in horror. Why do the wicked continue to live? Growing old and becoming powerful. Here's his challenge here, beginning verse 7. Why do the wicked continue to live, growing old and becoming powerful? Their children are established while they are still alive, and their descendants before their eyes. Their homes are secure and free of fear. No rod from God strikes them. Their bulls breed without fail. Their cows calve and do not miscarry. They let their little ones run around like lambs. Their children skip about, singing to the tambourine and lyre and rejoicing at the sound of the flute. They spend their days in prosperity and go down to Sheol in peace. Yet they say to God, leave us alone. We don't want to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what will we gain by pleading with him? End quote. But their prosperity is not of their own doing. The counsel of the wicked is far from me. How often is the lamp of the wicked put out? Does disaster come on them? Does he apportion destruction in his anger? Are they like straw before the wind? Like chaff, a storm sweeps away. God reserves a person's judgment for his children. Let God repay the person himself so that he may know it. Let his own eyes see his demise. Let him drink from the Almighty's wrath. For what does he care about his family once he is dead, when the number of his months has run out? Can anyone teach God knowledge, since he judges the exalted ones, or the angels is another rendering there? One person dies in excellent health, completely secure and at ease. His body is well fed, and his bones are full of marrow. Yet another person dies with a bitter soul, having never tasted prosperity. But they both lie in the dust, and worms cover them. I know your thoughts very well. the schemes by which you would wrong me. For you say, where is the nobleman's house? And where are the tents that the wicked live in? Have you never consulted those who travel the roads? Don't you accept their reports? Indeed, the evil person is spared from the day of disaster, rescued from the day of wrath. Who would denounce his behavior to his face? Who would repay him for what he has done? He is carried to the grave, and someone keeps watch over his tomb. The dirt on his grave is sweet to him. Everyone who follows behind him and those who go before him are without number. So how can you offer me such futile comfort? Your answers are deceptive. And that concludes Job chapter 21. Again, within the text, going back to verse number 7, he begins to get into this reality, because again, it's all about perception. How did they perceive that reality is carried out? How does God, here's the thing, they all recognize, I believe, everyone's in agreement within this discussion, that God is sovereign and that God is in control of all things. And it seems, though, that the point of contention is, how exactly is he in control? How exactly is he in control? Is he in control from this perspective that very strict justice must be carried out in every way? So going back to chapter 20 again, just mentioning chapter 20, let's see here. Verse number 4, for example, don't you know that ever since antiquity, from the time a human was placed on the earth, the joy of the wicked has been brief, and the happiness of the godless has lasted only a moment. Though his arrogance reaches heaven and his head touches the clouds, he will vanish forever like his own dung. Those who know him will ask, where is he? He'll fly away like a dream and never be found. He'll be chased away like a vision in the night. So here is someone who is wicked. And again, if I'm understanding Zophar's point correctly, as soon as they start acting wickedly, God takes care of them in an instant. Is that what's being mentioned? Or is it meaning that his wickedness has been brief and his happiness only lasts a moment, when thinking about just life in general being a vapor? It's one of those two options. And it seems to me that his meaning, and because looking at the entirety of the discussions of these three men, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, it seems to be that their point is, when you start acting wickedly, God is going to punish you. He's going to bring you under judgment. That seems to be the case. So with that being the case, then, here is their assumption and what they're putting forth. And yet here comes Job in verse number 7 saying, well, that doesn't exactly seem to be how things work. Because why do wicked people continue to live, growing old and becoming powerful? And not only that, their descendants are kept up well. Not only that, their material possessions are preserved and they do well. Their bulls are able to breed. Their calves are able to calve. The little ones run around like lambs. They spend all their lives in prosperity, and then they go down to Sheol in peace. Job's saying it doesn't look like God is really holding them accountable here and now for their sins and their transgressions. They just go. And they do that. In fact, they do that while even mocking God. Verses 14, 15, and 16 are a mockery of God. They're saying, who is Yahweh? Who is this one that we should serve? We don't care about him. He's no one to us. Well, Job continues on to verse 17, talking about God seems to sometimes preserve judgment for the children, that the wicked person gets away, but then their children have to suffer consequences. Job's asking out loud, how does that make any sense? Why should the children suffer for the parents' sin? If that does happen, then how does that fit into your perspective on how reality works? Why should this children suffer for the sins of the father? Verse number 20, beginning of verse 22, here it is just extremely, this sounds like it could be ripped straight out of Ecclesiastes. One person dies in excellent health, completely secure and at ease. He's well fed, he's good. But another person dies with a bitter soul. He's never had anything good. So someone dies who has experienced good in life, and someone dies who's not experienced good in life. What's the difference between two individuals? How does that make sense? If good leads to blessings and bad leads to punishments, then how do these both receive the same reward? How do they both die? Verse 28, you talk about the nobleman's house and the wicked person's tent. But hey, have you ever been outside of our county, we might say? Have you not seen in other places the wicked people have houses and big houses and they prosper, and sometimes the good person is the one living in a tent? Don't you accept their reports? Because again, they're talking about anecdotal evidence. All of them, I think of Eliphaz specifically, talks about listen to what I have learned, listen to what I have seen. So here in chapter 21, Job is just very much so really keying in on challenging their perspective, really challenging their worldview of how they think things are to work. And he says, I think the way you think things work, I think it's inaccurate. I think it's wrong. I don't believe that you are seeing things as they truly are. Because remember, the way that they are speaking to him is influenced by the way they see the world. They see the world as good people are blessed, bad people suffer. So here is Job suffering. Therefore, the only conclusion is he must have done something wrong. Concluding then in chapter 21 and verse 34, so how can you offer me such futile comfort? Your answers are deceptive. They're deceptive because you don't understand. Your worldview is incomplete and or inaccurate. Job at this point is in some senses trying to round out his argument and bring it to the conclusion of you just don't know what you're talking about. You're making judgments based upon something that is off base. And it shouldn't surprise us then in let's see here, chapter 22. Chapter 22, Eliphaz comes back in and he just goes in on Job now. We're going to read tomorrow in chapter 22 that Eliphaz, he just starts making accusations. He just starts saying, well, Job, you did this. Let's see. Verse, just a little preview, verse number 5. Isn't your wickedness abundant, and aren't your iniquities endless? You took collateral, stripped off people's clothes, didn't give people water, left the widows empty-handed, crushed the people around you. He just goes in on Job. And again, I think this is probably the low point for these friends in so much as they are just now at this point just making baseless accusations because they don't like the fact that their worldview is being challenged. I really think that's what it gets down to. I think it's pride on the part of these friends is that their pride has been hurt because their understanding has been challenged, and they are going to just ramp up now, turn up the heat on Job, making these baseless accusations that we'll look at tomorrow in chapter 22. Reality is, again, I think we look at what Job says here. Job is right. I think the writer of Ecclesiastes is right. Jesus speaks in some instances, speaking about those who the tower fell on. Were they any greater sinners than anybody else? No, bad things just happen. Sometimes the best people draw the shortest stick just based upon living in a world where chance is a reality in this life. Yes, that does not negate the reality that God is behind it all, that God is in control. Nothing happens outside of God's control. But part of God's control is allowing life to just happen sometimes. Sometimes very unfortunate things happen to the best of people. And sometimes the worst people seem to be the most well off. And yet we know that in the end, when God judges, he will balance the scales and justice will be served. The good will be rewarded. Those who are faithful to him will receive eternal blessings. And those who behave like those that are mentioned here in chapter 21, those who have the attitude of leave us alone, speaking to God, leave us alone. We don't want to know your ways. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what will we gain by pleading with him? Those who have that type of attitude, they will be judged for it without a doubt. Thank you so much for tuning into this reading on this Wednesday. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing those who are able to make it out tonight for our Bible studies at 7 p.m. We'll be meeting at 7 p.m. at 706 Ward Avenue here in Loudon. Again, continue to be praying for Leslie's family, all of the Hoovers, peace and blessings for them over the coming days. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Take care.